Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. I'd driven along Highway 212 many times before, but I'd never noticed the small white farmhouse to my right. It was standing on the side of an old highway that runs through the Beartooth Mountains in southern Montana, just outside the small community of Red Lodge. This road, with its various sections connecting small ranching communities, had a rich history. During my grandfather's youth, it was known simply as the Mountain Highway, a winding dirt road through the Montana wilderness that played an important role in connecting isolated settlements. The house was neat, newly painted white, and surrounded by a sturdy fence of planks and timber that enclosed a pasture on one side. When steam came out from under the hood of my fuel truck due to a punctured radiator hose, I realized that my time on this road was limited. I quickly pulled into a gravel parking lot and parked halfway to the house. "Hello? Is anyone at home?" I called out, knocking on the wooden door. Mountain dwellers might be wary of strangers, but once you earned their trust, they became some of the most hospitable people you could meet. Despite this, I decided to stay on the porch, keeping my distance just in case. After a while, a face appeared in the window above, its features unclear. A female voice asked, "Who are you and what do you need?" "I'm Marcus Thompson from Billings," I replied. "I was hoping I could fix my truck and get some water from you. I have a burst radiator hose which I quickly repaired a few miles ago, but it doesn't hold up." The woman told me to wait and then disappeared from sight. Looking around the property, I couldn't help but admire how neat and well-maintained everything looked. The fencing was intact, the porch was painted with fresh paint, and there was a wonderful garden on the side of the house. As I headed for the door, I was greeted by two imposing German shepherds who stood silently and obediently next to their owner. "Behave yourself and the dogs won't bother you," the woman assured me, opening the door and gesturing for me to enter. "Come on in. Can I get you something to drink? Can I have a glass of water, please?" I asked. "Are you from the Thompson family of Red Lodge? There are quite a few of them in the valley," she asked. I shook my head. "No, ma'am, as far as I know, my ancestors are from Billings, and we're not related to the Red Lodge Thompsons, but I suppose anything is possible." The woman brought me water and offered me a seat. Her dogs watched me closely. The refreshing cold water satisfied my parched throat, and a light breeze from the fan dried the sweat on my shirt. "My name is Elena Rodriguez, and there," she pointed to the pair of dogs sitting next to her, "are Samson and Delilah. Nice to meet you. I was wondering if you have any materials that I could use to create a flexible tube that works like rubber? I saw a group of vintage cars in the field over there." "Oh, don't be shy. Take whatever you need if it helps you," Elena said. I thanked her and carefully got up from the table, trying not to startle the dogs. Despite my efforts, they stayed alert until Elena ordered them to sit down, and they obediently obeyed. As we walked out the door with the two dogs, I couldn't help but notice Elena's graceful movement. Coming down from the porch, she looked to be about 30 years old, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tucked under a cap. She was wearing work boots, jeans, and an old t-shirt, and her eyes were bright blue. Grabbing tools from my truck, I'd learned basic mechanical skills from my father, who ran a small garage before I got into fuel transport. We headed across the pasture to a group of old cars parked behind a weathered barn. I rummaged through the collection and found some flexible steel and rubber hoses as well as clamps to temporarily fix the radiator. An hour later, my truck was ready to go. Evening was approaching and she suggested, "It's time for dinner. Why don't you go inside, clean yourself up, and eat before you continue your journey?" Her invitation was filled with genuine warmth. I hesitated at first, but eventually my rumbling stomach convinced me to agree. The alluring aromas wafting from the kitchen were irresistible, and I couldn't resist. Elena did not disappoint, serving an appetizing dish of grilled pork chops, creamy mashed potatoes, fragrant collard greens, and seasoned black-eyed peas, accompanied by warm, moist cornbread. To top it all off, she treated me to delicious bread pudding and steaming hot coffee. Elena, that was the most delicious meal I've eaten in years. No kidding? I complimented. Nothing unusual. She tried to downplay it. I don't have many guests, and I like to cook, so I think you came just in time. She fed a few pieces to the two dogs, who had been watching me the whole time. They quickly devoured the food and continued to sit with their tongues hanging out. By the way, what are those old cars near your barn? If you want to sell a few of them, I know a couple of people who might be interested. After a brief glance at me, she said, They actually belong to my ex-husband. They've just been sitting here since he left, a Fairlane and a Ford pickup truck. You can make good money if you decide to sell them. He hasn't been here for 2 years, and I think we need to do something about it, she admitted. A year ago, a man from Bozeman came here and tried to buy them at a very low price. He thought I was naive, but I didn't fall for it and sent him away, she reminisced, a smile spreading across her face, lighting up the whole room. I helped her clean up after dinner, and when we were done, I realized that it was time for me to hit the road before it got dark. Although I had only met this woman a few hours ago, there was a charming warmth about her. As I was preparing to leave, I felt a little disappointed. Miss Elena, I have a friend who would be very interested in buying your '57 Ford if you're going to sell it. I'll be happy to let him know. Here is my business card, feel free to call me. I will be happy to come here again in the future, I said, handing her my card. I think she understood that I was hinting at a return visit, but for now she left the decision open. After shaking hands warmly, I started the truck and drove back to Highway 212. As I drove along Highway 310 toward Billings, I couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful woman in the white farmhouse. She had mentioned that her ex-husband had left 2 years ago, just around the time when I became an ex myself. Every day I think about the past, about how bad it was and how good I felt back then. Unfortunately, the wrong people keep reminding me of this. My marriage to my ex-wife lasted 5 years before she left. I always thought they were good years, and Rebecca still holds that opinion, but it's been a long time since we first met. Back then, she was just a 19-year-old working at a local accounting firm, and I was a 23-year-old fuel truck driver who was trying to make ends meet by transporting fuel across several counties. Despite financial difficulties, I managed to cover all my expenses. On the other hand, Rebecca could afford to pay for her car while she lived with her parents. It was at this time that I plucked up the courage and asked her out on a date, but she rejected me, saying she was already dating someone from Bozeman. She didn't realize that she was just a casual fling for that guy and nothing more. When I stopped by the local diner later, there was a break in their relationship. I took a chance and asked her out again, and this time she agreed. We had dinner together, shared a beer, and went to a concert in Red Lodge, where we had an amazing time. It was so pleasant that we repeated it several more times. All in all, it was an unforgettable period. A few months later, I proposed, and we tied the knot in a beautiful outdoor ceremony next to a charming old country church in Livingston. A year after that, we managed to save up money and buy a gorgeous white frame house on a few acres south of Billings. There was nothing extravagant about it, but there was space for a garden and a barn where I could work on my projects. At that time, we didn't have children yet, and Rebecca combined working at an accounting firm with classes at the local community college. For several years, I was constantly on the move, delivering fuel and taking orders, sometimes staying overnight across the state. This continued until Rebecca graduated and got a job as a staff accountant at the regional medical center. I continued to make daily trips and eventually got promoted to route supervisor, which didn't greatly affect the time spent on the road but increased my salary thanks to management bonuses. Since we both worked full-time and Rebecca worked varied shifts, we had to cherish the time we could spend together. During the week, she usually had different schedules, and every few months, she switched between day and evening shifts. The only positive thing was the salary increase. Over time, she began to earn almost as much as I did, which allowed us to double our house payments. On weekends, when her schedule allowed, we visited several clubs in Bozeman along with several other couples we knew. Gradually, some of her colleagues began to join us, resulting in weekend parties consisting of about 12 people who got together quite regularly. We often visited a country music bar on Main Street in Bozeman. It was a spacious room with a large dance floor that comfortably accommodated many people. As a rule, we came in pairs. Most of us were married. Throughout the evening, like Rebecca, I danced with different people. I didn't see anything wrong with that because usually people dance with friends or acquaintances from work. I did the same thing as Rebecca. As I said, everything was fine. We left with the same people we came with. But as often happens, there will always be someone or something that will ruin everything. A few months after we started going to this place, I always danced with a girl from our group named Ashley who was Rebecca's colleague. She kept taking me to the other side of the dance floor, but I didn't think much of it at the time because I was generally trusting. When the next music track started playing, she moved closer to me during a slow dance. We were far away from our table, in the corner of the room. "Jesus, Ashley, what are you thinking about?" I asked. "Nothing you don't already want," she replied with a knowing smile. As a young man dancing with a beautiful woman who smelled amazing, I felt tempted, but despite the attraction, I was happily married and had promised to be faithful. "Ashley, I'm devoted to one woman," I insisted. "If Rebecca hadn't been here, we probably would have been at my place by now, but Rebecca's here tonight," I said with a smile, trying not to be rude. She just smiled back and replied, "Oh well, someday I'll have the opportunity." We moved on to another topic and finished the dance, after which I returned her to her date, a man named Tom. Rebecca and a few other people were still dancing, and looking around the dance floor, I noticed that she was dancing very close to a man I didn't recognize. He whispered in her ear, making her smile and laugh. Suddenly he pulled her closer, and she seemed to enjoy it. I briefly thought about cutting in, but then I remembered Ashley's advances. Looking back, I realized that I should have intervened, but that moment had already passed. Another round of drinks was ordered, and Rebecca returned to the table with her new dance partner. I pretended I didn't notice when she introduced him as Derek, a school friend whose family had moved to Bozeman. I immediately disliked him, most likely because of where he put his hand, his smug expression, and the way he looked at me with his hand on my wife's shoulder. But when Rebecca noticed my reaction, she moved his hand away, and eventually he left after a brief exchange. The conversation on the way home was predictable. "Do you let every man touch you like that when you dance with him, Rebecca?" I asked. "No more than if you were touched by a woman," she replied, surprising me. "She quickly took you to the other side of the room." "I'm not going to let this happen, and I'm going to stop it," I replied. "Well, you too, big boy. Are you jealous every time a man thinks he has a chance at something impossible?" Rebecca replied. She chuckled, easing the tension. "Derek has about the same chance of getting me into bed as Ashley, none," she said confidently. And she was right. After some time together when we got home, everything went well for the next few months. We met regularly, sharing driving duties among ourselves. One Saturday night, I found myself one of the few men in a group dominated by women. For men from our usual group were unable to attend the weekend gathering. Rebecca and several of her friends were enthusiastically drinking tequila and eager to get intoxicated. Rebecca's tendency to lose all her inhibitions when drinking tequila was well known, which meant that she would need to be watched. I tried my best to keep up with her and dance as much as possible. The dance floor quickly filled with other women, including Rebecca's friend who was supposed to keep an eye on her, while I dealt with Ashley's persistent advances. When the dancing ended, I found myself back on the patio where people went for fresh air. "Marcus, she's safe," Ashley said. I found Rebecca and her friends still laughing, so I decided to leave them alone and return to the table. Most of the party participants were on the dance floor, and I joined Ashley and another woman they were talking to. They were both quite intoxicated, and the other woman was completely drunk. "Marcus, Rebecca says you're quite impressive," the drunk woman slurred. I burst into loud laughter when she had trouble pronouncing the words, and Ashley was just grinning foolishly. But then she accidentally said something that sobered us all up. I was the only one at the table who hadn't drunk too much. Drunk people find everything funny and don't have filters. "It's not fair that she has access to two and we don't have any," she complained. They thought it was funny and started giggling, but soon Ashley realized the gravity of the situation. The meaning of these words became obvious to me when they slipped out of this drunk woman's mouth. Ignoring Ashley's reaction, I casually asked, "Who else is so impressive?" Derek's name slipped out before she could stop herself, earning a disapproving look from Ashley. "Oops, probably shouldn't have said that, right?" she whispered, trying to back away. After Ashley's reaction, even under the influence of alcohol, she seemed to understand the significance of the conversation. I excused myself to the restroom when Ashley tried to intervene. "Not now, Ashley," I said firmly. The comments might have had a different meaning than it seemed to me at first glance, leaving me uncertain. Two tipsy women were laughing about there being two men in my wife's life, me and a man named Derek. It was unclear if they were hinting that she had a history with him before me, during our relationship, or currently. Perhaps it was just the ramblings of someone who had drunk too much. When closing time came, I gathered the intoxicated group in the courtyard. The two designated drivers loaded everyone into cars and set off. When Rebecca and I arrived home at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had to help her to bed. Sitting outside and sipping a beer, I thought about the situation. If this behavior was a one-time thing, I could put up with it, but it seemed to be becoming a pattern. The irony was that I knew how she felt about me. If she had made a mistake due to excessive drinking or something like that, I would forgive it as a one-time error, but if it involved the same Derek from a few months ago, it would be unforgivable. Sometimes I stayed overnight in other towns on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Rebecca had Tuesdays off, which gave her a perfect opportunity to do whatever she wanted without the risk of being caught. It seems fate played a role in my marriage. One Tuesday evening, instead of staying in Livingston, I drove back to Billings with some barbecue and a few drinks, settling down to watch the game from the field next to our house. When I arrived at 11 o'clock in the evening, I noticed that Rebecca's car was gone. I called her and told her I'd be home late. She replied that she planned to stay at home, watch TV, and maybe call her sister before going to bed. I was sitting in the truck, leaning back with the window down, the radio playing softly. The lights in the house were turned off. Around midnight, two sets of headlights drove toward the house and slowed down before turning into the driveway. Rebecca's car stayed in its usual place, and another car parked right behind it. Unsurprisingly, it was him, Derek, with his distinctive cowboy hat. Everything proceeded as I feared. The lights came on in the bedroom, then the soft night lights we had strategically placed came on. Despite the temptation to go inside, I stayed where I was, consumed with anger at her and at the whole situation. If I had violent intentions, I could have resorted to drastic measures, but the thought of prison, even the local county jail, scared me off. I stayed where I was until the lights came on at 2 o'clock in the morning. Soon her visitor appeared from the front door. He kissed her, exchanged words, and walked quietly to his car while Rebecca watched from the doorway. As I said before, if I were some kind of dangerous person, Derek would be in serious trouble at that moment, but I decided to start the truck, turn off the headlights, and drive back to town. Over the next 2 weeks, I made several more observations with similar results. Finally, I decided to take action when they returned home earlier than usual the following week. I walked up to his car and flattened all 4 of his tires as well as one of Rebecca's. When I got to the back of the house, I noticed that the bedroom lights were already on and the window was open to let in cool air. Quietly entering through the back door, I turned on the recording function on my phone and headed to the bedroom. Turning on the light, I was met with their shocked expressions, which were truly memorable. "This seems like quite a situation," I told them both. He looked around aimlessly, not understanding what was happening. Rebecca was clearly stunned to be caught and began crying uncontrollably. I gestured toward my belt and ordered him to leave immediately. Hastily grabbing his clothes, he rushed past me, desperately trying to escape. When the door slammed behind him, he let out a yell. "Oh my God, my car!" he shouted, realizing that his tires were flat. Without looking back, he disappeared, never returning to the house. "Marcus, let me explain. I understand that there are many ways to look at this situation, but in the end, when all is said and done, there comes a moment of realization that is shocking," Rebecca pleaded. "Please be quiet and listen to everything I have to tell you," I replied. "Just tell me one number. Tell me how many times this has happened between you and this person." "Marcus, I'm begging you to listen to me," she begged. "Just one number. How many times?" I repeated. "I will ask you over and over again until you answer." "Just once, I swear," she exclaimed. "Thank God," I muttered, leaving the bedroom and heading to the kitchen for a cold beer. The floor creaked softly as I looked at her in a worn pink robe. After finishing my drink, I opened another one and went outside. The jerk was gone, his car with 4 flat tires glistening in the moonlight. I chuckled to myself, feeling some satisfaction. A few weeks ago, I had already shed all my tears. Now it was necessary to focus on the task at hand. I took my truck out of the field and parked it behind the house, considering my next steps. I remembered the trailer hitch in the barn, which was ideal for towing. I hitched Derek's car to the trailer and started the 5-mile drive to town. As I was driving, I passed him about 1.5 miles down the road, walking with his flattened car following me on the trailer. I left his car in a public parking lot and drove home. When I entered the house, Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table. "Marcus, can we talk about this, please?" she asked. I looked at her and simply answered, "Not today." I took the remaining bottles and went to my workshop. This was my sanctuary, and I'd set up a decent place for myself to retreat. I finished the rest of my beer and fell asleep. The next day, I called my supervisor and said that I had personal problems that needed to be solved at home. I went back to the house to deal with this situation. "Rebecca, it's time for you to move out and live with your sister. This situation is your own doing," I said. To my surprise, she didn't protest much. Perhaps she thought that if she acknowledged it as a one-time mistake, then everything would be fine. After fixing the flat tire, her sister helped load their things into both cars. Before leaving, Rebecca made several attempts to explain, but her constant excuses became tiresome. The recurring theme was that we were young and constantly making mistakes, that we could fix everything and maybe even start a family. It became unbearable. I got to the point where I only answered work-related calls. I told Rebecca to get everything she needed from the house while I was at work. I decided to keep the house for myself and buy out her share without offering alimony. We had invested everything we had in the house. Apart from a small retirement fund from work, it was a straightforward decision. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, but attempts at reconciliation did not stop. Rebecca often approached me at restaurants, joining me at the counter or bar. Her sister visited me regularly to chat and bring me food. At some point, I suspected that Michelle might be interested in me, but it turned out not to be so. In the end, I came up with a new plan to put an end to all this. I contacted Ashley and invited her to go to the club on Friday night. I was surprised when she agreed to spend the whole weekend at my house. This woman turned out to be more than I expected, and we had an intense time together, but I couldn't wipe the smile off my face all week. I chose Ashley not only because of her qualities, but also because I knew she couldn't keep secrets. I was sure she would share details with her work friends, including Rebecca. Surprisingly, everything turned out even better than I imagined. The next weekend came, and on Friday evening, I decided to go to the music hall alone. It looked like Rebecca had switched to the day shift, as she was there with some members of our old group and, to my surprise, with Derek. The thought processes of women have always been a mystery to me, but I suppose this is a typical male perspective. Rebecca, her sister, her parents, and other people from the past, not counting a few women with different intentions, were making plans for our reunion, and yet she was with Derek, sitting at the bar. I leisurely enjoyed a cold beer, watching couples dancing on the dance floor. Suddenly, Rebecca and Derek came out onto the dance floor and put on quite a performance, seemingly for my entertainment. After they finished, Derek returned to his table, and Rebecca came up to me at the bar. "It doesn't have to be like this, Marcus," she said, confused. "What do you mean? We're not together, and I'm not with anyone else." "I'm the only one here," I said, looking around the room defiantly. Rebecca's face began to turn red, a familiar sign that she was about to lose her temper. I quickly intervened, leaned over to her and said softly, "Listen carefully, Rebecca. I don't care that this guy lives in your house. You've been with him for a long time, so you can continue to communicate with him. I'm sure you know that I had a great time with your friend Ashley last weekend." Her reaction was instantaneous. She jumped back and slapped me hard across the face, then burst into tears. Her companion, who was sitting at the table, got up and started moving toward the bar, but hesitated when I raised my hand in his direction. "Do you see that jerk you're with now?" I said. He froze when I raised my hand. All he cares about is having a good time and nothing more. This has always been his priority, and you've given him what should have been mine over and over again. You took away what was sacred between us and let this man into our bed, into our lives, and now you have to live with it. I've had enough. With these last words, I finished the rest of the beer and left. She ran after me with tears in her eyes. When I left, I ended up at another bar, enjoying local beer and watching the evening crowd. I later found out that Rebecca left with a friend shortly after me, and it was said that she didn't go out as often as before. Even though Rebecca claimed that I was dating Ashley again, I resisted the temptation because I was focused on my work. Rebecca kept approaching me at every opportunity but seemed to have realized that this was a futile effort. Another problem that arose was the relationship between her parents and mine. Despite my absence, my parents continued to invite Rebecca to family gatherings. She had become like the daughter they never had, and they didn't want to part with her. The divorce and its consequences motivated all of us to make changes in our lives. Personally, I found solace in returning to the mountains. Growing up in Montana and the national forests gave me a sense of belonging and identity. I didn't know what it meant to be a true Montanan, but I knew I was one. I discovered that deep down, I have a passion for the wilderness. As a result, I decided to change my usual lifestyle. Instead of sticking to my usual route through Billings or crossing Interstate 90, I chose Highway 212 through the mountains. It may have been a little longer, but the scenic ride in good weather was worth it. I even had the opportunity to stop and enjoy fishing by mountain streams. It's a mystery to me how, in all these trips, I never noticed the charming white house in the mountains, but one day it finally caught my attention. When I finished checking my truck and decided to take a break with a cold beer, the phone suddenly rang in my pocket. It was Elena Rodriguez from the mountain ranch, the woman I had visited last week to fix my truck. For several days, I couldn't get her out of my head. Something about her intrigued me. Despite our brief meeting, I was going to call her about the '57 Ford to get some new information. "Hello, Miss Elena. Your hospitality always makes a lasting impression on me. I was planning to contact you soon about your old Ford as well as some other cars you mentioned. Your description of them aroused my interest, and I decided to act. I thought it would be helpful if I came to help you decide on your next steps. You have 11 old cars, and all of them, as far as I remember, were in excellent condition both in body and frame. The next steps are clear and understandable. Evaluate and sell them," I said. She already knew about this, which made the conversation feel more intimate. "I'm going to drive out there next Thursday, but to be honest, I don't mind going for a ride in the mountains tomorrow, because Sunday promises to be wonderful," I said, offering the suggestion optimistically. Half an hour later, I was sitting at a barber shop in Billings, enjoying a haircut and choosing a great Cabernet for the trip. Although I usually prefer beer, I can still tell a good red wine from a bad one. The next morning at 9 o'clock, I set off on the familiar route under a clear blue sky. Driving through mountain valleys, I noticed fishermen casting lines on both sides of bridges. I was tempted to stop and watch them, but I had commitments. As I was approaching my destination, I saw a young guy fishing for a large trout, apparently caught with fly fishing techniques. Continuing on my way, passing Miss Elena's ranch, I noticed she was talking animatedly with a man, and her two dogs were closely watching her every move. After parking the truck and walking down the driveway, I noticed another man sitting in a different vehicle, watching the conversation. The discussion grew louder as I approached. Travis mentioned that I could get a steak in exchange for the work I did for him a few months ago. One man stated, "I don't know anything about any arrangements. Travis left here 2 years ago, so if he promised you something, resolve all remaining issues directly with Travis." Elena replied firmly. Before he could speak, I said, "Good morning, Miss Elena. Is everything okay here?" She looked at me with slight concern before answering, "It's okay, Marcus." This gentleman was just about to leave. The man's gaze met mine, full of anger, but I just smiled and wished him a good day. We watched as he got back into his truck and drove off down the road. "What was that about?" I asked. "I think my ex-husband is giving me trouble. He's forbidden to enter the property and even drive on the road in front of the ranch because of a court injunction," she explained. I couldn't help but smile. How convenient. Before I forget, I brought a bottle of wine, St. Francis Cabernet. "If you want, put it in the refrigerator for later," I said. A kind smile remained on her face as we returned to the porch, accompanied by the dogs. When the wine was safely stored away, we sat down and discussed the collection of old cars near the barn. Among them were the 57 Ford, the 65 Fairlane, the 67 Barracuda, the 69 Olds 442, and the 48 Caddy, as well as several other less notable sedans. It was quite a valuable collection, especially if she could get a fair price for them. I mentioned that I knew someone who would be interested in paying a good sum for the 57 Ford. "I think in its current state you could get from $8,000 to $10,000 for it," I informed her. "Let them know that I'm interested," she replied. We continued to discuss the details, and I decided to contact a person in Livingston who specialized in selling such vehicles. I was hoping he would help sell them on commission to ensure a good price. When everything was settled, I was treated to a delicious fried chicken dish with all the necessary seasonings. After tidying up and clearing the table, we walked through the pasture and entered the mountain forest behind her ranch. The terrain was amazing, a combination of ranch land and mountains with lush greenery. We stopped next to a bubbling stream, admiring the peaceful landscape. "So, Marcus, tell me about yourself. Are you married, single, in a relationship, divorced? Where have you been, and where are you going?" she asked. I was caught off guard, not knowing how to respond, and decided to be honest by telling her a simplified version of my story. I shared with her the story of how I caught Rebecca with her lover, which eventually led to the collapse of our marriage. I also told her about how she, her sister, her parents, my parents, and all our friends tried to reconcile us. In an attempt to show Rebecca that I was moving on, I even mentioned dating Ashley to get a reaction. I admitted that I had dated others, but nothing serious. Elena listened with a knowing smile, showing that she too was experiencing a similar situation to one degree or another. "Marcus, let me share my story with you. I made the mistake of getting married right after graduating from high school. It turned out to be the biggest regret of my life. If I had known that after a few good years, everything would turn upside down so quickly, I would have gotten out of that situation sooner. My ex-husband had unrealistic ideas, just like your wife. I was amused when I called him Pinocchio. That's probably the funniest name I could think of for him. I don't know if you know Travis Coleman. He's from the south side of Red Lodge, not too far from where you are now. It turns out, according to my father, Travis was interested in a woman from Billings who turned out to be not as available as he thought. They had something going on a few times, but he didn't mention that he was married. When she found out that I was his wife, she quickly ended the relationship. It's pretty ironic, really. One day she came to our ranch while Travis was at work, apologized, and confessed everything to me. Although we'd known each other since high school, we'd never moved in the same social circles. Apparently, Travis was persistent and didn't accept refusals. As a result, the woman moved to Texas to live with her father, partly because of Travis's constant harassment. What a jerk, I thought. The expression seemed appropriate. He pursued her all the way to Texas. She called me to tell me about it, and then I decided to pack all his things and leave them on the porch, telling him to come and get them before they got ruined in the rain. 2 days later, he returned, broke into the ranch in my absence, made a mess, and brought his things back inside. When I returned home with Samson and Delilah in the evening, I cornered him with both dogs while cleaning up after him. Do my dogs really know who their owner is? She gently stroked both dogs, and they sat at her feet, happily wagging their tails. The next day, Dad and I visited the law office to get a restraining order against him. A few days later, he was served at work. The following week, he tried to return to Texas and resume his pursuit of that woman, but apparently, she had already made it clear she wasn't interested. As far as I know, he ended up staying with some woman in a trailer park outside Billings. I still talk to the woman he was chasing sometimes. She's wise enough to keep her distance from him. Elena didn't seem bothered by this situation. She continued to smile brightly. Getting rid of that jerk was the best decision of my life, she said. After thinking about it, our conversation continued, and I found out that Elena had adjusted well to life after the divorce. She worked as a traveling veterinarian, serving ranches throughout the Beartooth and Absaroka mountain ranges. Her schedule was demanding but flexible. She might spend 3 days treating cattle at a ranch near Yellowstone, then have 2 days off before heading to check on horses at a spread near Columbus. The ranch she lived on was inherited from her grandmother. Before the divorce, she had managed both her veterinary practice and the small ranch with Travis's help. After Travis left, there was no one to help maintain it, and some areas had fallen into disrepair, but she was slowly getting things back in order. While preparing to leave, I inspected the old cars near the barn and took some pictures to share with a friend. Despite the late hour and early work schedule the next day, we said goodbye warmly. She hugged me, and I kissed her on the cheek. I'll come by this week, maybe Thursday, if I get a response from my friend from Livingston. If I can't come, I'll definitely call you. I will be very glad, Mr. Marcus Thompson, she replied with a smile. That Sunday afternoon, I drove back along Highway 212 feeling like a young man in love. It wasn't really a date, but it was more than just a casual visit. I couldn't wait for Thursday. Every Tuesday at the local steakhouse in Billings, there was a special promotion. Prime rib with all the fixings for $14.95, including drinks. The dish included tender slices of beef, green beans, potato salad, and the famous Montana dinner rolls. Rebecca and I often visited this place, but this evening I decided to go alone and took a booth to enjoy a meal while reading the newspaper. I barely had time to take a bite when they entered the restaurant. Noticing me, they quickly and without hesitation joined me in the booth. My mother and Rebecca took the seats across from me. I couldn't deny that Rebecca looked amazing. She looked more than fine, and she was well aware that I had noticed it. Do you two always randomly show up when I'm sitting like this? I asked casually. We come here every Tuesday, Marcus. You know that, my mom replied. Rebecca just smiled and turned on the charm. With a twinkle in her eyes, she looked even more attractive. Feeling trapped, I reluctantly joined them when we all loaded our plates at the buffet and sat down to eat. It seemed like there was a competition going on to see who would eat the most, and I was a participant in it. It was one of the strangest meals in recent times. It felt like old times for the three of them. "Isn't this great?" Mom exclaimed with a big smile on her face, remembering how the four of us used to gather here every week. Rebecca's face lit up with memories. I excused myself to go to the restroom. When I returned, Mom started to get up to let me back in, but I stopped her by gently touching her shoulder. "No need. I have an early route tomorrow, and I need to get some rest." I put a $20 bill on the table, smiled, and wished everyone a good night, including Rebecca, who had a satisfied expression. I walked out the door. It was only 6:30 p.m., and I was already sitting in Murphy's pub with a cold pint of beer in my hand. The pub had always been a favorite place, but recently it had become even better since the owners, Ben and Kelly, had started hosting live music there on Saturdays. Now there was enough space to dance and enjoy the performances. Rebecca and her colleagues didn't particularly like this place, so I made it a rule to come here often. Besides, it was a good place to meet like-minded people. That evening, Ben was serving at the bar, pouring me my favorite double IPA, and I was looking around the room. A few women were playing pool, and some were sipping their drinks and watching the game on TV. "It's been a while, stranger. How are you?" "What's up?" she asked, sitting down next to me. As always, Ashley looked incredibly attractive, perfect for such a relaxed evening. "It's been a long time since we last met." "Well, Ashley, you look amazing, and life seems to be treating you well," I sincerely complimented her. "I'm holding on," she replied. "Things have been a bit hectic lately, but having you here gives me hope." With that, she gently touched my arm. I bought her a beer, and we found a table in the corner next to the pool tables where the women were playing. While we were talking, I found out that the old group still meets on weekends, and even Rebecca takes part in the gatherings. Ashley didn't say anything about Rebecca's current situation, and I knew it wasn't my business. But the longer we talked, the more I realized that I wanted to spend the evening with her. We went to my house, and the evening progressed naturally. Since she didn't have work the next morning, I let her stay and spend time with me. "Marcus, I know we're not looking for a serious relationship, but I thought it would be nice to have casual companionship from time to time. Do you mind?" she asked. After everything had gone well the previous night and that morning, I thought it might work. "I don't mind, as long as neither of us starts a serious relationship with someone else." Elena called me the same day and said she would be back home on Thursday afternoon and evening unless she had to leave for an emergency call to one of the ranches she served. This call made my day. I contacted a friend in Livingston, and after reading his response, I realized that Elena would benefit greatly if she accepted his offer. When I returned home that evening, the house was in chaos. Ashley was in the house, as I had suggested that morning, but by lunchtime, Rebecca and my mother had come to visit on a far-fetched excuse. It wasn't the first time she had done this. She always had a list of reasons ready. Otherwise, my mom might have come for different reasons. It was obvious that Ashley was there for a reason. Regardless of my presence, Rebecca seemed disoriented by the unexpected appearance of another woman in the place where she used to live. But despite my mom's attempts to act as a mediator, the two seemed to have had a confrontation. Fortunately, apart from disheveled hair and smeared makeup, no one was seriously injured. A potted plant was overturned, but the physical damage was limited to that. Half an hour later, Mom, Dad, and Rebecca arrived at the house. While I was waiting for them to come in, I prepared myself mentally. Mom spoke first. "Marcus, I don't know what kind of household you run, but allowing women to come and go at any time is unacceptable." Dad remained silent, realizing that it was better not to interfere. I looked at Rebecca and then back at Mom. "So how old am I, Mom?" "You're 30, she replied. "And how long have I been living on my own?" "Since you turned 19, I think," she replied. "That's right, since I was 19, I confirmed. "And I've been living in this house since I was 24, right?" She nodded in confirmation. "Am I a married man, Mom?" Well, you were and you should be, she replied. I was married before, but not now. Do you understand? Now, let's move on to the next question, Mom. Who are these women you were talking about? As far as I know, there was only one woman living in this house, and I found her in bed with another man. So who are these women supposedly running around my house? I'm interested to know. My mom and Rebecca were sitting on the couch in shock and couldn't speak. My father started to say something about not talking to my mother like that, but I stopped him before he could get into more trouble. Let me tell you frankly about some things. In fact, this house belongs to me. At the age of 30, I am not married and do not lead a restrictive lifestyle, so from time to time I like to have companionship. Then Rebecca cried out with tears in her eyes, "You can always take me back." I chuckled and took another sip of my drink. You've already been here once, and look how that turned out. Having set some boundaries, I firmly stated, okay, here's what I don't want. I don't want anyone to enter my house when I'm not there. I didn't think about it before, but now everything is clear. If I can't trust you, I'll change the locks. If you don't like my guests, please don't hesitate to come back another time, and we can have dinner together. But if an attractive guest appears in my bachelor home, imagine how awkward it would be if my parents tried to interrogate her. I grinned at the three of them. Does anyone want a beer? Rebecca, you too. My parents took the drinks, and I brought out some cold chicken from the fridge. I took Rebecca to my workshop. There's no reason for you to come to my house and criticize the people I spend time with or any other aspect of my life, Rebecca. Absolutely none. I know you're having relationships with someone else right now. Why is it acceptable for you to have fun with another man? But you're angry when other women get the affection you threw away for that jerk Derek. You created this situation, Rebecca, not me. I don't know who you're in a relationship with right now, and to be honest, I'm not interested. I don't care. So it all comes down to this. It's time to start behaving respectfully and moving forward in life. Please stop trying to involve my parents in our problems. I know they care about you and you care about them, but it's important not to involve other people. She didn't hurt you, and neither did I. When she looked at the ground, I could see the pain in her eyes. Despite her feelings for me, she had continued to betray our relationship. When we returned to the house, Mom and Dad were relaxing in armchairs, absorbed in an old TV show. After everyone left, I was finally able to relax, except for the upcoming phone call from Ashley, which I had to answer to apologize for the chaotic family meeting. The next day, while I was having lunch at a local diner, Rebecca's sister joined me at my booth. "Hi, Marcus. You look as handsome as ever," she greeted me warmly. I had always admired Michelle and her kindness. As I mentioned earlier, during our conversation, Rebecca had shared with me the details of the events of the previous day. I think she understood everything, Marcus. Really, I'm upset about how things turned out, and you know how I feel about it. You were my brother-in-law, and you always will be. I would defend you myself. I'll do my best to steer her in a different direction and see how things go. But it seems like everything you said resonated with her because she told me she plans to move on. I'm glad to hear that, Michelle, and I appreciate your support. I've always cared about her, but I won't be able to forgive her actions. Yes, she's aware of that. She's been fixated on that terrible guy since you first discovered them. But I think she realizes now that she lost everything because of him. I just nodded, and we continued our conversation until she had to leave for work. I paid the bill and headed to the mountains to get to Elena's place. Elena was in the garden when I arrived at her ranch on Thursday, and her dogs, as usual, announced my presence. It was incredibly hot that day, and she was dressed appropriately. Very short jeans and a fitted t-shirt. I tried my best not to stare at her graceful form. She warmly hugged me before we headed into the house to prepare refreshments. "My babies adore you," she said, pointing to the panting dogs resting on the kitchen floor. "I wish they could tell me about it themselves," I replied with a smile. She poured herself some iced tea and handed me a cold beer. While we were discussing the specifics of selling her car collection, time flew by quickly. My friend from Livingston offered to put them up for auction with an 8% commission and a guarantee of $6,500 per vehicle. Considering the condition they were in, I thought it was a fair deal. Elena agreed. Having settled all the details, we relaxed on the veranda, sipping drinks in the afternoon sun. "Do you want to swim?" Elena asked with a playful smile. Dad widened and deepened the pond a couple of years ago, and on such a hot day, it's just perfect. "I forgot my swimming gear," I said. "You won't need it. There's no one here," she said. I assured myself that I wasn't shy around women and that I had no physical flaws to worry about, and I agreed with a smile. We took our beers and towels and went to the back area. When we arrived, Elena wasted no time removing her clothes, tossed them on a nearby branch, and dove into the pond fed by a mountain stream. I hesitated for a moment, but then I shrugged and started to undress. Finding myself as undressed as Elena, I followed her example and jumped into the pond. Entering the water up to my shoulders, Elena was standing next to me, her face glowing with happiness. This place brings back nostalgic memories from my childhood when my grandmother lived here. We would splash in the water to cool off on hot days, and I remembered it for a long time. I remember the boys from the neighboring ranch who tried to spy on us until my grandmother had her dog stand guard. In those days, the nearest place to swim was the Yellowstone River, where the current was always too strong for comfort. After cooling off in the water, I swam for a while until I was next to Elena. When I surfaced, our faces were just a few inches apart, and I looked into her sparkling blue eyes. "I like you, Marcus Thompson. I really like you," she said, moving closer. When I confessed that I had fallen for her like a schoolboy from the moment we first met, her answer was simple: "Okay, you can take me to dinner tonight." With that, we swam a little more before leaving the pond. After drying off and getting dressed, we decided to have lunch at a restaurant in the nearby town of Red Lodge. Despite the limited choice of dining options in the area, we were drawn to a place that promised excellent brisket. We were seated at a cozy table away from the hustle and bustle, and I realized that I was having one of the best afternoons in recent memory, all thanks to the wonderful company of the woman sitting next to me. During our conversation, we touched on all imaginable topics, and when the sun began to set, I realized that it was time to take her home. It was about 9:30 p.m. when we pulled up to the gravel driveway. I walked her to the door and kissed her on the lips while her pets, Samson and Delilah, watched us closely. "You don't have to drive back tonight, Marcus. I've got the guest room ready for you. Enjoy a hearty breakfast in the morning and leave when you're ready," she offered with an encouraging smile. Her offer was too tempting to resist. I canceled my evening plans and spent the night in her guest room. The next morning, she sent me off to work with a delicious country breakfast. On Saturday afternoon, we arranged a date and dinner in Bozeman. That night, we stayed at a charming bed and breakfast in the historic downtown area. Elena was different from all the women I had met before, especially Rebecca and Ashley. She had a genuine nature that captivated me, and I couldn't help but think that her ex-husband was a fool when he let her go. After that moment, we started dating seriously and maintained our relationship despite the distance. I often stayed at her ranch, and sometimes she would drive to Billings in her veterinary truck to handle calls at ranches along the way. I met her father, who was wary of me at first until Elena spoke to him privately. I don't know exactly what she said, but after that, he was always friendly with me. Over the following months, our relationship deepened naturally. Elena would call me when she was heading to ranches near my fuel delivery routes, and we'd meet for lunch at small-town diners. I began to understand the rhythm of her work, the early morning calls for emergency births, the satisfaction she felt helping struggling ranchers keep their livestock healthy, and the quiet pride she took in being one of the few female veterinarians serving the remote mountain communities. On a beautiful Saturday morning while fishing on the Stillwater River, I decided to make an important decision in my life. As soon as this thought occurred to me, The line on my fly fishing rod suddenly tightened, causing the reel to spin and the line to race out until I managed to control it with my thumb. This served as a positive sign for the beginning of an exciting struggle. After a few minutes of excitement, I landed a hefty 1.5-pound trout, which felt like a positive omen and confirmation that everything was going smoothly in my life. Later in the afternoon, Elena and I returned to Billings and decided to spend the evening in Bozeman. We ended up in the Country Music Hall, a familiar place where I often spent evenings with my old group of friends. Due to my new relationship with Elena, I didn't see my friends as often, including Ashley, but by chance, I ran into them that evening. Ashley was there with her new partner, as well as some familiar faces from our past, including colleagues from the medical center where Ashley and Rebecca still worked. I noticed Ashley at the other end of the room, surrounded by old friends and acquaintances. Rebecca seemed pleased with the company of a man I didn't recognize. Even though she was trying to move forward with her life, she still found opportunities to express regret about how our marriage had ended. My parents continued to accept her as a member of the family, which didn't bother me much anymore. Rebecca didn't know that Elena and I were in a serious relationship, and it was the first time she had seen us together. Elena and I were dancing and chatting at the bar when Rebecca came up behind me. "Hello, stranger," she greeted me. When I turned to face her, I said, "Hello, Rebecca. You look great." I looked around the room for her companion. "You too, Marcus," she replied. "Your parents told me you're doing well. I'm sincerely happy for you." I introduced her to Elena, noticing the hint of sadness in her eyes, which she skillfully hid. We exchanged a brief hug, after which she returned to her company. Suddenly, I felt a sharp blow to the head, which made Elena scream, "No, Travis, don't do that." But it was already too late. He swung at me again, and I defended myself, knocking him to the ground with my right hand. Elena started crying, and Rebecca suddenly rushed to help the man lying on the ground. "Jesus, Marcus, what were you thinking?" Rebecca exclaimed. I stared at her, trying to understand the situation, but then it dawned on me that this man was actually her companion. Rebecca explained that he was the one who had attacked me and not the other way around, as she had initially thought. The bouncers immediately escorted him out of the hall, and Rebecca went to the restroom to recover. Elena and I returned to the bar, where 2 fresh drinks were waiting for us, courtesy of the establishment. Elena revealed that she had a restraining order against Travis because he was unstable. I nodded in agreement, trying to put my anxious thoughts aside. This incident had ruined our evening, but when we were about to leave, Rebecca came up to us again. Elena explained who Travis was and what he had done, and Rebecca almost burst into tears since he had been her date. She was left without transportation, so we decided to take her to her sister Michelle's house. As we were leaving, Rebecca stopped to say goodbye to someone. Elena and I headed for the parking lot, and Rebecca followed. Suddenly, I saw a bright flash and heard a loud crash in front of me. I reacted quickly and fell to the ground. Travis had fallen backward. I quickly checked myself for injuries but felt nothing, assuming that the intoxicated troublemaker had only struck me. Suddenly, Elena let out a startled scream. I turned around and saw Rebecca lying on the ground while security guards were rushing to the scene. I knelt down next to her and saw that she was still breathing, barely conscious. Time seemed to freeze as if I was watching the unfolding events from the sidelines. A woman asked me to step aside and began providing first aid. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, an ambulance arrived, and the paramedics took over. Rebecca was taken to St. Vincent Healthcare in Billings, and we followed her. It occurred to me to contact Michelle to inform her of the situation and ask her to join us at the hospital. When she arrived, Rebecca had already been taken to the operating room. We sat anxiously in the waiting room and waited for news. After a while, a nurse appeared and informed us that Rebecca was still undergoing surgery. It would be some time before they could report on her condition. At that time, her condition remained critical. I left Elena and Michelle to get some food, and when I returned, I found them standing by the window with their hands clasped. I looked confused, but after we managed to get some food into ourselves, we all gathered nearby to wait for the operation to finish. 3 hours later, the doctor appeared to inform us about Rebecca's condition. She is currently in the intensive care unit and should be able to survive. The full extent of her injuries will be known only after she wakes up. The impact caused some trauma, and fragments may have affected the medial temporal lobe, which could potentially influence some aspects of her memory. However, her motor functions appear to be unaffected, which was demonstrated during the operation. More detailed information will be provided in the coming days as her condition improves. We were given some time to sit with her, and Elena and I comforted a distraught Michelle. The next day, the doctors provided updated news that matched the information received the day before. Rebecca was in a medically induced state for 4 days. When she finally woke up, Michelle and her parents were by her side, and the first person she asked to see was me. Michelle brought me up to date before I visited Rebecca at the hospital. Despite slight visual issues in her right eye, which doctors said would improve over time, Rebecca had demonstrated good speech and hearing abilities. She had partially lost her memory and did not remember how or where she was injured or by whom. "Marcus, you have to be ready for this," Michelle told me. "She thinks she's still married to you, as if nothing has happened in the last few years. She even thinks that you were planning to start a family together. As a result, you may have to handle these expectations very carefully." I didn't know what to do next and even thought about avoiding the hospital visit, but Elena, in her wisdom, refused to listen to any such suggestions. She accompanied me to the hospital but stayed in the hallway while I went upstairs. Rebecca looked unwell, but she was already awake and resting. Her parents had just left the room, and Michelle was by her side. Without delay, she asked, "Marcus, where are my wedding rings? I remember putting them on yesterday morning before all this happened." She looked at me with a mournful expression, seeming to expect an answer from me as if I were still her spouse. I didn't know what to do. The truth was, I was in love with Elena, and Rebecca's wedding ring was still in the dresser in my bedroom, where I'd left it after the divorce. "Rebecca, do you know what date or year it is now?" I asked quietly. "It's probably July 2017, she replied, confused by the contradictory information around her. I turned to Michelle, who was avoiding my gaze with tears in her eyes. "Rebecca, don't worry about your belongings right now. Your health and possible memory recovery are the top priority," I said with a slight attempt at a smile, but my worried expression was evident. Rebecca reached out to take my hand as I sat down, and I accepted the gesture, trying to make sense of the situation. We discussed various topics, including family and recovery, but I was careful not to reveal anything that might shock her in her current state. Later, in the waiting room, Michelle and I talked to Rebecca's doctor about the prospects of her memory returning. It turned out that she could recall most of her memories easily, recognized family and friends, but had difficulty piecing together dates and events. Some things she couldn't remember at all. I asked the doctor if she could restore those memories. The doctor explained that it was difficult to predict, suggesting that memories could be triggered by certain people or places. The doctor couldn't advise how to proceed, saying only that it was unknown whether these memories would return to her. In any case, the probability was 50-50. The decision was mine to either maintain the status quo or perhaps reveal everything to her. After expressing my gratitude to the doctor, I hugged Michelle warmly. I confessed to her that I had been planning to propose to Elena soon, but now everything was complicated. To my surprise, Michelle told me that Elena had already suspected my intentions. "It seems I wasn't as secretive as I thought. Marcus, you need to follow your heart," Michelle said. "Rebecca made her choices and you've made yours. Whatever happens with her memory, that doesn't change what she did or how you feel about Elena." I realized Michelle was right. I had already made my decision long before this accident. All that remained was to act on it. A couple rode their motorcycles along the gravel path near the old ranch house. The wind ruffled their hair and raised a cloud of dust. When we arrived at the bridge over the mountain stream, we decided to stop for a rest, to stretch our legs, and try our luck at catching a large brown trout. To our surprise, this elusive fish still swims in those waters to this day. It's been 8 months since Rebecca was injured, and Travis Coleman was sentenced to 18 months in the Carbon County Detention Center after our confrontation in Bozeman. Assault with a weapon, but the judge took into account his intoxication and lack of prior violent offenses. As a result, I sold my house in Billings and got the opportunity to work from the regional fuel depot closer to Elena's ranch, which I did willingly. I moved into Elena's farmhouse, as my job still required occasional overnight trips throughout central Montana, but it was quite manageable. Elena and I, who works as a traveling veterinarian serving ranches throughout the Beartooth and Absaroka ranges, even took a 2-week vacation last month to escape the Montana winter and relax together in Arizona. After a rejuvenating vacation far from our mountain home, we returned tanned, rested, and ready to continue building our life together. Reflecting on my past failed marriage, when I took the elevator down to meet Elena in the hospital lobby 8 months ago, I realized that I wanted my future to be clear and simple. I had already decided what I wanted. I didn't understand why I should give up my current happiness for a woman who had been unfaithful, even if she didn't remember any of it. I know people who drink too much and don't remember anything the next day, but they are still the same people. This realization made my decision easier. Michelle had several heart-to-heart talks with Rebecca and did everything she could to help her remember, even enlisting Derek's assistance, but it didn't work out completely. After several months, Rebecca gradually came to terms with the truth, although she couldn't remember the details. In the end, this realization brought her great sadness initially. She became depressed until Elena, being the compassionate person she is, intervened. One weekday, Elena went to Billings without my knowledge while I was delivering fuel to remote ranches near the Wyoming border. It was only weeks later that she told me about it. "Marcus, I had to do something. Put yourself in her shoes and imagine how you would feel if your spouse suddenly seemed to disappear without explanation. I can't say for sure how I would react, but I suppose it would be similar to Rebecca's reaction. She knew that her ex-husband was in love with another woman and living with her. This news was undoubtedly difficult for her, and I sympathized with her confusion. Elena acknowledged the reality of the situation and recognized that Rebecca's own past actions had contributed to her current state, even if she couldn't remember them. I suggested that she focus on moving forward rather than trying to recover memories that might be painful. She had a choice to build a new life, and she decided to do it. When we were fishing in the Stillwater River this past weekend, 2 more motorcycles appeared next to us. Rebecca and her partner, with whom she has been living for the last 3 months, joined us in trying to convince the elusive trout to bite again. Her partner, James, is a physical therapist who helped with her rehabilitation. They met during her recovery, and while their relationship began as professional support, it gradually became something more. Despite the betrayal, the divorce, and the difficulties associated with everything that happened, Rebecca and I were able to emerge from it all as friends. My parents have also come to terms with the situation and continue to love Rebecca, often inviting her to visit with James. They've accepted reality, and they've grown to appreciate Elena's kindness and genuine nature. At the moment, my life is going well. Elena and I are planning to expand the ranch house to make room for the future we're building together. Last night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the Beartooth Mountains, she told me some wonderful news that will change our lives forever. Rebecca has found her own happiness with James, and while the doctors mentioned that her injury might affect certain aspects of her health in the future, she seems focused on the present rather than worrying about what might come. She's returned to work part-time and has started volunteering at a local animal shelter, inspired by Elena's veterinary work. Sometimes I think about how different our lives might have been if that bottle had never been thrown, if Travis had never shown up, if Rebecca had never lost those crucial memories. But then I look at Elena, see the contentment in her eyes and the life we're building together. And I realized that some things happen exactly as they should. The past taught me valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the importance of moving forward. The present has given me a love more genuine than I ever thought possible. And the future? Well, Elena and I are ready to face it together, whatever it may bring. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.